Welcome, everyone. I'm Nathan Mersereau from Planning Alternatives, and I welcome you to our virtual Cybercrime Protection Workshop. We had originally hosted or intended on hosting this as a in-person event, and given the crisis that we're in with the coronavirus and basically just about all of our country and most of our world is in quarantine, this virtual workshop is designed to help you have access to information that is relevant given the challenges that we face right now in our world. More and more of us are relying on the internet to do business, connect with family, friends, research things. So this is really the prime time that we're vulnerable, frankly, to fraudsters and cybercrime. So in that light, I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Adam Moseley from Charles Schwab. Adam is a 23-year veteran of Charles Schwab and leads a nationwide team that works closely with firms like ours with technology and operations and establishing cybersecurity policies, and it's long been an area of specialization for Adam. And in fact, one of Adam's staff worked very closely with us with the collaboration of our Chief Compliance Officer and IT staff to bolster our cybersecurity protection steps. Adam's based in Chicago, so as we meet virtually, it's a great way to connect. We were both commenting that it was a short commute from the kitchen to our chairs here. Adam is joining us from his home in Libertyville in Illinois, and I'm in Birmingham. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Nathan, and appreciate you having me, and I appreciate those on the line with us today for their time and their attention that they're paying to this very, very important topic.
Thank you for making the time. What's unique about this event, and I know that you've participated in a number of conversations like this, where we're going to be talking about best practices around cyber protection. I'll ask a couple of questions, and the format, though, is for our audience, in that we want you to submit questions. And if you look on your screen, you'll see a place that you can populate and type in questions. So this event, everyone, is for you. We're here to facilitate. This is a discussion. It's not a lecture. I'm going to be kicking off a couple of questions for Adam's perspective, but it's going to be your questions that we want to spend the next hour or so to really tune into and make sure that you're getting value out of a leading industry expert in our field and in the area of cyber awareness. So I want to thank everyone for being part of tonight, and we're recording this. We also look for your input for other topics that you would find relevant through a webinar format. But to kick us off, Adam, we hear that email is one of the biggest cyber threats. We use it constantly to communicate, and I know there's so many practices and instincts that we have even when using email. What do you see as some very practical best practices to be aware of?
Thanks. So email is it's a fun and fascinating place to start. It sounds so very basic, but I think what most would find surprising, and we certainly see this in our own business too, we think of email as cyber public enemy number one. That it is perhaps one of the greatest cybersecurity threats that there is. And the reason for that is that nearly all incidents that we see in our business, nearly all incidents that we see happening within investors or their advisors, most track, if not all actually, track back to a single inbound email in their inbox. And what's at issue here, and this is for all of us, and myself included, we tend not to hesitate to click on links or to open attachments or to sometimes respond to requests for really sensitive information. And somewhere along the way, we started thinking of email almost like we behave with instant messaging, where it requires an immediate response and you trust implicitly the person on the other end of the wire there. And it's really all of that that needs to change. As we think about email and some of the best practices that we share along those lines. And there's actually many. We think one of the very best things that everyone can do is simply slow down a little bit. But let me go a little bit further. I've challenged advisors, and you might even remember this, Nathan, in some of the sessions that you've been in where I've presented to groups of advisors, but I've suggested that we be suspect of everything that's in our inbox, and maybe go so far as to treat it as guilty until we prove that it's innocent. Now, that might sound a bit extreme, and it's actually by design, but if we do that, and if we start thinking and behaving a little bit differently, and if we start slowing down, we might catch these things that might otherwise trip us up. And I'm going to get specific with some of the best practices here, and where some of the malicious attacks tend to come in. We advise users of all email platforms to be really careful with links that are in an email, and to be thoughtful before you click on a link, to make sure that you're trusting the source that link is coming from. Same with attachments. If there's an attachment in an email that you get, if you weren't expecting it, if it's coming from an untrusted source, sometimes even if it is coming from a trusted source, you got to think twice about opening it and make sure as best as you can. And sometimes that means you need to pick up the phone and ask, but make sure that it's legitimate, because sometimes those links or sometimes those attachments, they send us out to a website where malicious software can infect our computers, or sometimes the attachment itself can be a virus, or sometimes the request for information that we think is coming from a trusted source, might be from what we call a fraudster, or someone who's looking to inflict, cyber criminal activity, upon us. So being thoughtful with links, attachments, and so forth and so on can go a really long way. And as we think about links and attachments, and this is one of those best practices. And by the way, a note for those on the line. If you take note of something that's maybe new and interesting to you today, write it down and share it with those in your community, because I guarantee you there's an opportunity for you to help strengthen the cybersecurity profile of not just yourselves and your families, but really those around you. And one of the best practices that we often share on email relates to the unsubscribe link that so many of us see at the bottom of the junk email that we get every day. And most of the email that I get, in fact, is junk. That link there at the bottom that says unsubscribe, that's another one that we shouldn't be clicking on, but we all do. And up until maybe a year, two, maybe 18 months ago, I was clicking on that. But the reason you want to avoid that is that sometimes clicking on that link alone might advance you out to a website where you're encouraged to give up a little bit more information. Maybe it's an email. Maybe if it's a malicious website, it is cataloging the user as a legitimate target, and you might get more junk email as a result. So one of the best things you could do when dealing with junk email, and this is going to be the case no matter what email platform you're using, is you should take that email and simply drag it and drop it into the spam folder or the junk folder or whatever it's called on your email client platform. And the beauty of that is that when you do that, all of our email systems are smart enough to know that, okay, the next time we get an email from that sender or that has that type of content in it, it'll just throw it right into your junk email. And then you don't have to deal with it. Maybe once a week or so, you'll look in there and you'll just clear them out. And almost without exception, I'm immediately deleting anything that is in my junk email folder. But in the event I had something in there that was legitimate, I would just move it on back to my inbox and and deal with it from there. So that's one best practice as we think about management of email and junk email. There's another really important threat that I want to bring everyone's attention to, and it has to do with what in our space is called phishing. And this is an attempt by a cyber criminal, usually by way of an email, or these days could be by text message too, where you're sent a link, an attachment, or a request for information, and it looks like it's from a legitimate source. And then when you respond to that, you might give more sensitive information, back to that fraudster. And one of the most common ones that we've seen in our business to date are emails that look like they're coming from Microsoft, and they'd encourage the user to click on that link and reset their password, or that they needed to reset their password. And when they click on that link, a browser opens up, it takes them out to Microsoft's website, and they're encouraged to enter in their user ID and password. But here's the thing, what we've seen now time and time again is the email wasn't from Microsoft. The website that came up wasn't Microsoft's, but it was a cloned version of it. And in this case, when the users were entering in their email credentials, what they were effectively doing is handing over their user ID and password, over to that cyber criminal. And now you've got a cyber criminal inside of your email account where they can mine it for sensitive information, where they can use it to communicate with others in your network, for nefarious purposes. So it all comes back to just being really thoughtful about links and attachments and how you manage email. And if you do receive a link in an email, one of the best things you could do is actually go out to the website. Instead of clicking on the link, close the email, open a browser window, and actually navigate out to that website yourself and log in. And that way you're sure that you're actually on the legitimate website, not perhaps a illegitimate one or version of it that link might have otherwise directed you out to. So just some general thoughts around email and how to do a little bit better there.
No, thank you. That's insightful. We have a question from an audience member. What do you think of secure email services like Proton Mail in Switzerland?
So I'm not familiar with Proton Mail, but I am very familiar with many different secure email platforms. And I equate secure email platforms much like the portal that your firm uses, your client portal with your clients. I'm a big fan of using that type of technology to communicate sensitive information. When we communicate over email, maybe so all the users know, we think of email as like we do a postcard. And that means when you're writing that email or filling out that postcard, someone can look over your shoulder and see it. When a simple email navigates the internet, it's sent out in clear text, and anyone who happens to have the technical ability and savvy to do so can intercept that email in flight. And then if an email is in a user's inbox and that email account is compromised, it can be viewed in there as well. When using a secure portal, there are a number of different security measures in place that can prove to be super helpful in keeping the bad guys out. And so for those reasons, I'm a big advocate of using those. I know you guys use it there as well, Nathan, with your clients. And I know there's numerous different types of platforms that are out there.
Another question from an audience member: as we are using more websites like Zoom, what threat does that create? And Zoom has actually been in the news and discussion.
It has, and not to pick on Zoom, because as we're using a platform here right now, these are becoming increasingly popular. They're absolutely critical. In fact, so much of the work that we're doing these days, is done over these mediums here. So when looking at these platforms, we would advocate for picking good platforms, ones that are well-known, ones that have commercial or institutional grade technology and capabilities. With Zoom in particular, and I'm going to try to hold back on my comments because I don't know all there is to know, but it seems like there were some vulnerabilities with that particular platform that they are needing to address that might have otherwise exposed sensitive or critical information on users' machines. So there too, we would just suggest that small businesses are working with providers that can recommend the right type of web conferencing platform and hopefully navigate around some of these issues that that Zoom and maybe others are going through.
And do you see any best practices as a user of these platforms, just to be aware of?
Yeah, there's some very good ones, and as we use these platforms internally, at Schwab, as we use them with clients and other business partners, we're very mindful of what we share on these particular platforms. We never share an entire desktop. We only share a document. We only share one particular screen as opposed to everything that might be open and on that particular computer. we're very, very careful about how we send out invites regarding these things, so that we don't unintentionally invite somebody onto a web conferencing platform who shouldn't be there. There are those types of things where, and then others are just around, I think, good hygiene and use of this technology, and making sure that you're in a setting where perhaps others who shouldn't be listening in aren't able to. So, given the type of sensitive information that's shared over these platforms these days, it's really important that when you're on a session like we're on right now, that we're doing that in a as secure of an environment as we can.
That's wise. Thank you. A question from an audience member: what is a VPN and how can I get one?
So I'm always thrilled when this question comes up. So I'm gonna take a path into VPN. Maybe I'll answer it quickly, but then I'm gonna back up and explain why you might want to use one. So VPN is an acronym, stands for Virtual Private Network, and it's a type of technology that we use every day at Schwab, that most advisors themselves use. Its sole purpose really is to encrypt the communication that happens between one's device and the internet destination, or who might be on the other end of that communication chain. And where VPNs are absolutely critical, it's when you're on public Wi-Fi. Actually, generally, we recommend the use of these technologies all the time because of the encryption benefits and the security that comes with them. But one of the questions that often leads us into the VPN discussion is, should we use public Wi-Fi? Now, that might be Wi-Fi that is at the airport, at the hotel, at Starbucks, at other places like that. And we recommend against that, for a number of reasons. And one of them is that we just don't know the security that's running behind some of these public networks. In fact, they're very easily set up and very inexpensively, and can be done by fraudsters. And if we don't know the security that's running behind it, we don't know that it is keeping the bad guys out. A unsecure public Wi-Fi has the potential for someone to be on that network and actually watching everything that's happening, every website that a user is going to, every user ID that they physically enter, every password that they enter. There's ways that fraudsters can capture that information on a weak public Wi-Fi network, or even worse, on a Wi-Fi network that they themselves are hosting. And that's where things get a little scary. Is if you read up on it a little bit in the news, you'll find that very often at hotels, airports, business centers, conferences, and other public destinations like coffee shops, it's very easy for a fraudster to come in with a small package of technology and to host a Wi-Fi network. And they can call it whatever they want. They could call it Starbucks too. And if you happen to go on that network, the potential exists for them to see everything that you're doing. So number one, we suggest that you don't use public Wi-Fi, that you avoid it as much as you can, and that instead you use cellular. You use your cell phone. You set up your cell phone as a hotspot if you have to, so that you can use that with a laptop that you might have along with you. And data plans, fortunately, are becoming less and less expensive, and most of us now have unlimited data. So setting up a simple hotspot, tends to work very well, and using our cellular service provider to do that. Now, the question that often comes up is, well, what if I don't have cellular service? Then what do we do? And if in a pinch, and you need to use public Wi-Fi, that's where the VPN really comes in. So that when you go onto that public Wi-Fi, you immediately turn on your VPN. It's this piece of software, and I'll go into a little more detail on that in just a minute. But as you activate your VPN, it encrypts everything that you're doing, so that if someone were on that network, if someone were able to watch what you're doing, what you would be doing would be so heavily encrypted they wouldn't be able to do much with it anyway. So the last question on this one that we often get is, okay, so where do I get these VPNs, and how do I make the decision? There are dozens, if not hundreds of them available. You've got one there too. Yep, a nice hotspot there, I see.
Exactly.
With a VPN and the software versions that we're speaking to, you can get these in the various app stores, whether it's the Google Play Store for those Android users out there, or the App Store that we all have access to on our iPhones. You can pick up a good VPN pretty inexpensively and bring that down to your device and to your mobile devices, and it can help there. And maybe a couple other points I'll make on this is that when deciding what kind of VPN to use, it's really important not to go for the free one. It's okay to pay a few dollars a month for this. And the way to think about it is you want to work with a company that is going to be able to reinvest in their platform, to go ahead to always increase and improve their own security posture. And the only way to do that is to work with a company that is able to continue to develop out their platform. So I look for ones that are reasonably priced. I look for ones that have great ratings, that are used by a lot of people, and I just try to triangulate that a little bit. Personally, this is not a recommendation, but the question always comes up, so I'll go ahead and I'll answer it. Which one do I use? I use one called Hotspot Shield. It's one of many that are out there, but it has served me well, for many years. It's well known. I paid monthly for it, and it does a good job of securing, whenever I need to encrypt and manage what I'm doing online.
That's good. That's great insight. Thank you. We have a question. My mother is 87. What advice do you have for her kids for keeping her information safe? So this is a challenge generationally as our parents age, and we need to protect vulnerable investors, and so much is focused on senior.
It really is. It really is. There's a couple different angles that I think we can approach this one, but let's start with the senior investor angle, because I think one of the most important things we could do is bring some awareness to this one. So we for some time now have seen a very concerning and a very unfortunate trend, and that is the deliberate targeting of senior investors, by cyber criminals who are taking advantage of them online. So bringing some awareness to this, I think, is probably one of the first and very best things we could do. And the threat and what it tends to look like, or how it tends to manifest itself, is that these investors, as they are online, now this might be through email, it might be through Facebook, it might be through whatever other social platforms they might be on. What we've seen time and time again is they get contacted. They're contacted by an old friend, and there's a very pleasant catch-up type of exchange that happens. Sometimes it's over the course of days, weeks, and then there's the request, and it's a request for a little bit of help or some short-term assistance. And very often, these investors, they'll feel inclined or maybe even obligated to help, and they do. And then we learn that it wasn't a friend all along. It was a cyber criminal who was taking advantage of them, that posted information online, and was able to make contact with that investor and fool them. So messages to families who are looking to take care of their loved ones, I would say let's bring some awareness to it. Let's make sure that much like I talked about email, let's make sure that our parents are really thoughtful about when they're contacted like that, again, by way of email, by way of social network platforms, and maybe treating those first as guilty before they're proven innocent. Second to this, I would say, is we're very strong advocates of end investors creating what's called a trusted contact, and that is someone that within the family is trusted, that we and your advisor can call upon in the event we spot something that just doesn't look right on our platform. It could be an out of character request, could be anything along those lines, but it gives us someone to turn to help us navigate that particular situation. And maybe the last thing that comes to mind, Nathan, and help me along here if there's any other area you want me to go with this. But I'm a big advocate of trusting one's instinct, and it's probably one of the most important messages I can share tonight, because we've all been fooled at times, and we've all got caught in a situation where we wish we wouldn't have given up something over email, or maybe we got tricked. And if we think back, there might have been something that we didn't listen to, and maybe it didn't feel right. And that's another message I would share, with my own mother. And that is, if something doesn't feel right, if something doesn't seem right, it's not right, and delete it and move on. And if it's really important, it'll come back. But then also pick up the phone and call those that you trust to help you navigate that. And for your clients on the line, clearly that's, Nathan, you and your staff, other members of their family, those are some of the very best, non-technical things I think users can do to protect against this increasing threat that we're seeing.
Thank you. I have a question. Do you recommend using a password storage program? If so, can you suggest a free or low-cost vendor that you have had experience with?
3-year low cost. All right. So if I may, so the answer is yes. I use one myself. Most I know, especially every member of my staff, we use them. We use them at Schwab too. We actually deploy one. So I'll get to that. If I might, much like with the VPN question, I'd like to take an alternate path into this one, because I think there's a conversation to be had around passwords in general, and I think the use of password managers is part of that. So first, for some historical context, there's a governing body that we look to that provides us with standards of how we should think about security and how we should think about passwords. And back in the day, this entity said that your password should meet 4 criteria. Your password should be long, your password should be complex, you should change those passwords often, and your password should be unique. And those had been the general rule or rules that we lived by for some time. And what that governing body found, and I bet most on the line could relate to this, because I know I was doing this, those parameters or those guidelines created some really bad behaviors. What they were finding was that as users would go to create or change their password, they would just change the last digit. And because it was too much to do all of that. So they came back, this entity, it's called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They came back and they said, well, your password should be now 2 things. Your password should be long, so I want to talk about that. And then your password should be unique. And those are really specific points of guidance I want to put out there, and I'll explain why. So first, on length. Length is incredibly important when it comes to passwords. In fact, I often say that length trumps everything as you think about passwords. And the reason for that is that the fraudsters or the cyber criminals, very often they have access to off-the-shelf technology that can allow them to crack a password that is 6 or 8 characters, sometimes in a matter of minutes. But when you take a password and you move it to 12, or even better, 15 characters, it can take decades using that same technology to crack that password. So length is really important. Now, creating a 15-character password is incredibly difficult. So how do you deal with that? And this takes us into the advent of what are called not passwords, but passphrases. So when trying to think of a 15, or this is called a 12 to 15 character password, it's much easier to think of a passphrase, a collection of words that is meaningful to that user. We think of it as easy to remember, but difficult to guess. And if you bring those words together, delete the spaces, you'd be amazed at how quickly you can come up with a passphrase. So that's a way to think about length and navigating that. Now, on the topic of unique passwords, so it's incredibly important, and this is perhaps one of the most important things I think I can share tonight on at least on password management, and maybe in general. But with passwords and the importance of them being unique, here's the reason, or the way I want users to think about that, and that is cyber criminals, when they attack entities like LinkedIn, Comcast, Yahoo, Equifax, and you hear that among the data that was harvested, they pulled user IDs and passwords. Very often, it's so that they can take those user IDs and passwords and perform what is called a credential replay. All that means is they take it, they plug it into some technology, and that technology very quickly goes out to hundreds of different websites and sees if they can get in using that same user ID and password. And you know what? A lot of the time they can, because we use the same passwords over and over because it's too cumbersome to have separate passwords. So what we've recommended here is that as you think about passwords, at the very least for your sensitive accounts, so this is your email, this is any file sharing application you're using, most certainly mortgage, your banks, your credit cards, your Schwab account, other custodians you might work with, and so on. Those sensitive accounts, make sure that those passwords are unique and separate from one another, so you can avoid this type of situation called a credential replay. I often share that we have the ability to track and count when we think we have a credential replay event happening on our platform, when one of these pieces of technology comes in and tries to log in as a user. And everyone is amazed when I share that we've tracked over 1 billion with a B of these types of attempts over the years. And by the way, that number is probably 2 years old at this point. I stopped counting or asking for updates after we eclipsed 1 billion on that. So that's why it's really important that at least for your sensitive, your financial institution, your email accounts, we're using unique passwords. Now, this is what leads us into Password Manager. So I'm sorry, I know it was a long trip into that.
But I see where you're going. This is helpful.
Okay, so when you got a long password, you got a unique password. Now you're going to have more of them, and they're going to be nearly impossible to remember. So there are ways now to manage that, and that's where password managers come in. And these are applications best taken down from the various app stores that are out there, whether you're on an Android device or an iOS, an iPhone, type of device. You can go out to the app stores and download these, and they're fantastic tools. And they're very good to use because, one, they're incredible at securing those passwords and encrypting those passwords. They're very helpful at creating passwords. They database the passwords and make them very easy for a user to pull them up. They integrate really well within the platform so that as you go out to a website on your iPhone, you can pick the password right from the password manager and log it in. And for my own personal passwords, and this is true of all of the sensitive accounts that I have, I don't even know the password anymore. It's in the password manager. I grab it from there, and my password manager is secured with an even more robust password. It's dozens of characters. It's actually a sentence is what I use, and I find them fantastic. At managing all of that for me. I know I'd have to look. I know I've got north of 100 passwords. I don't use them all, but they're all in that application, and they're all secure. And for that, I'm a big fan of that. So the question always comes up. Okay, so what are some ones to look at? Here too, you want to pay for it. Here you want one that is widely used. So you're looking for tens of thousands of ratings. You're looking for 4.5+ stars on this. I've used actually 3 of them, and the one that I adhere to personally, and again, this is not a recommendation, but I use one called 1Password, and I think it's great. I've used one called Dashlane. It's another leader in the space. It's excellent. Nathan, you guys might use one called LastPass in your organization. I think I know that based on the IT provider that you use. It's fantastic. Those 3 good ones right there. And here's a bonus for your clients and their families. These applications, much like you use one, Nathan, in your business, families can use these too, and they can share passwords, but yet they can control who in the family has access to what. So you need to identify an administrator of sorts within the family, but these can be shared across teams, families, businesses, and we're big fans of this. I probably pay a few dollars a month for it, and I do it gladly.
That's great. The question we've heard before is, with Password Manager, you do have to remember the master password, and any best practices with master password management. Yeah,
here too. Make it long. This is where a passphrase is really helpful. A memorable sentence. It's that best practice I shared of easy to remember, but difficult to guess. Sharing it with a trusted contact, that you have, and if it, I mean, you could also, I was gonna say, you could share it with an attorney who kept it on, on file somewhere if you had to, but I have never actually seen anyone go to that particular extreme. But those are the keys, to the application right there. So you want to be really sensitive with it.
Thank you. Bouncing back to a topic of email, a question
Yes.
came in. Do you find that there's one email vendor that's better than the others? So as we think about AOL, we think about Gmail, we think about Yahoo, there's been even local cable providers that will provide a free email access. And even within email, there's some practices around sometimes setting up a separate email address for certain items so that you can start to direct maybe, topics using one email. So having multiple email addresses is another angle too.
Sure. It's a really good question. So I'll share my opinion on platform providers, but it's really just an opinion is all. But I don't want anyone to take this information. Okay, I got to go change. I use Comcast. I got to go change, because I'm actually a believer that there's plenty we can do, and for most, there's much more that each of us can do to simply secure whatever the platform is we're using right now. So personally, I'm a big fan of using providers, or I should say email platform providers that are actually in that business, and it's perhaps one of their core competencies. Google, Apple, those are good ones. I'm not as big of a fan of Comcast and others like that. But again, not that I would want to encourage any user to move off of that platform, but I'm looking for large providers, in the space, and that have really good platforms that provide really good integration with whatever mobile device, that I might be using. For those users that are using, some of the other ones, whether it's AOL, Comcast, Yahoo, if they're still in that space, I'm not sure. One of the best things that we can all do, and actually, this isn't just specific to email, this is really with respect to any provider that you have to log into. You want to make sure, here again, you're using a unique password, that it's a long password, and that you're also leveraging something called two-factor or multi-factor authentication. It's actually the very best thing you can do to protect your email account, whatever it is. And any email provider in the space today that is worth considering offers multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And all that means, and this is often a setting that you have to enable. So you might want to call this provider and ask them how to do it if it's not clear when looking into their platform, but typically it's inside of the settings or security settings of that platform. But you enable two-factor authentication, and what that does is that if it notices that you as the user are trying to log in from a computer that hasn't logged into that email account before from that computer, it's going to ask for a second form of authentication. That might be a text message that is sent to your phone. It might be a code that's running from an app. Apple offers this, Google offers this, many of them offer this, but it in addition to a great user ID and password is the very best thing you can do to secure your online accounts. We offer this at Schwab. We recommend that everyone use it. It's an option. Other custodians in the space do the same thing, and other providers, whether it's email or providers of online information, provide that. So look into multi-factor, two-factor authentication, turn it on. I've often said that if multi-factor authentication is available to you and you're not using it, you should consider yourself behaving recklessly online. It's really that important. If a user ID and password is compromised, it's this and only this that is going to keep that fraudster out of your account. Because if they've got your user ID and password, they can get in, but if they don't have that multi-factor, it's much more difficult.
That brings to light some of the services that are out there around alert systems and data protection. I know various financial institutions, banks are offering it. LifeLock is certainly
Yes.
a big provider of that. What's your insight around that? Is that slam dunk guaranteed you're never going to be hacked?
No, not at all. In fact, many of the, by the way, I'm a fan of these platforms, and I think they're great, but often they alert you when it's too late, and then they'll offer assistance in terms of helping you clean up the situation. That's the business that LifeLock is in, and that many others are in. For example, but they alone often will not prevent identity theft. They can just help solve for it. But even still, I'm an advocate of these platforms because I like the awareness they bring to what happens. So so for quite some time, I was a LifeLock user. I had my whole family set up to use it, and I remember when I would get a new car or anytime my credit was run, I would get an alert instantaneously. And that was so good to see, because in the event I never got one, but in the event I got an alert and it was not something that I was managing, it would have allowed me to act immediately. So I am a fan of these, and I'm a fan of staying on top of one's credit. There's a free app out there called Credit Karma. Does a great job. I look at it often, and it just helps me see the accounts that are out there. Again, it's all after the fact, though. It shows you what's open out there, but it might allow you to act more quickly. The one, I'm not a total expert in this area, Nathan, but I think the one way to truly keep someone out is to put a lock on your credit bureau. And you can do that with each of the three providers that are out there: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. So you can do that. Two of them, I think, allow it free of charge. One, you pay for that service. I personally don't do that, but I've considered it. But I know that if I were to have my credit locked like that, and you can lock and unlock it fairly quickly from what I understand. But if your credit is locked and someone tries to open an account under your name, and to do so, they need your credit run, that will stop that from happening. So there's different ways to navigate that one, but generally, I'm a fan of leveraging these types of platforms so that you're alerted in the event that something happens.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes for our session here, and I encourage everyone online to submit questions and to just have whatever is on your mind be shared, because we're here for you, and it's so grateful, Adam, for your time and being gracious with participating in our session tonight. Following up on passwords, should I allow my browser like Chrome or Edge to save my passwords on my personal device for ease of use?
So I love this question, and I love that the users are thinking through this and being really thoughtful with it. So here's how I think about that. There are security experts that would recommend against that, because if a machine is not secure, then the risk exists of those passwords being harvested off of that machine. So a security expert would tell you, no, you're better off using a password manager for that and not saving them to your browser. And there's been some different articles out there that have demonstrated how easy it is for some to gain access to these user IDs and passwords that are often stored deep within the operating systems of our computers, but in clear text, so they're very easy to get to for people that know what they're doing. So generally speaking, it's not a good idea. But here's the other side of that. Personally, I do it. However, I'm really good about keeping my machine secure and up to date. I have a user ID and password on my computer. I have enabled encryption on my Mac, which is sitting on the counter right in front of me here. That means if that device is lost or stolen, it's worthless to anyone who grabs it. They might be able to wipe the hard drive clean and use the computer as their own, but the information on that machine is worthless. I've enabled firewall on that computer. By the way, this is something you can do whether you have a Mac or a PC. You can do it for free. The encryption on a Macintosh is called File Vault, or a Mac, excuse me, is called File Vault. You can find that in your security settings. On a PC, it's called BitLocker. You turn it on, it immediately enables encryption. And then you make sure that you have a user ID and a password to log into that machine, and you're in good shape. And then the firewalls those are turned on very easily within the security settings as well, and that keeps that prevents unauthorized access into your machine by someone who tries to hack in over the internet. That's what a firewall does on that one there. So I use those protections. I'm also the only one that uses my computer. So for those reasons, and maybe lastly, but importantly, I keep my operating system up to date. I keep it patched. You should be doing that, whether you're on a PC, whether you're on a Mac. And for those reasons, I feel really comfortable about saving information onto my computer. But not everyone does that. Not everyone is in the space that I am and think about these things all the time. So not everyone's going to do those things. And if a user is not, then I would suggest that they not save passwords to their browser. But here's the one last piece of that, and why I'm a fan of saving them to my browser, is it forces me to use my machine to log on to my accounts, whatever they might be, because that's where the passwords are, and it keeps me off of public computers that might be at a hotel business center or somewhere else. I'm only using a trusted machine and one that's mine. So if someone is interested enough in all of those different security precautions, they're probably okay, Nathan. But if a few of those are left out, then there's a little bit of a risk there.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question on VPNs. Do you use a VPN only with Wi-Fi? Do you need a separate VPN for each device? Just a little bit of clarity on the application of VPN.
Yeah, I have to think through this. I've only used a VPN when on Wi-Fi. I've actually never tried to use it on a wired network. But with a wired network, it means that someone would actually have to be physically, plugged into that network to see what is going on. And I think we all know the chances of that are pretty unlikely. So it is predominantly when one is on Wi-Fi, public or not. I actually use a VPN when I'm at home, but it's just kind of a habit these days. And when I log on from work from home, it's actually part of our protocol to immediately institute a VPN. So, but think VPN is for use when on Wi-Fi, and most often, public Wi-Fi. All of our home Wi-Fis, there's various ways to secure those and to make sure that we're using some of the more, updated standards there. And those are things that will keep the criminals out. But I think the likelihood of, somebody sitting on the curb, attaching onto someone's home Wi-Fi is really, really slim. Not the security concern I'd want to focus anyone on, but it's when in a public space is how I think about that. And then was there a second question on the VPN piece? I want to make sure I got that.
Yeah, do you need VPN for each device?
Yeah, the VPNs that I'm talking about, they're software. So when I subscribe, I mentioned the one that I use personally, called Hotspot Shield. My subscription allows me to have that on numerous devices. It's just an app, and I turn on that app, and it works within the settings on my iPhone or on my Mac, and it encrypts. So it is one software, but my subscription allows me to use it on multiple machines.
I have a question about biometrics, fingerprint.
Yes.
Does the use of biometric technology mean I can use public Wi-Fi, or is the underlying password still vulnerable to hackers?
Yeah, so biometrics and using devices that have biometric capabilities, I think they're fantastic. Whether it's a thumbprint, these days most of us are logging on to our mobile devices using a face ID or face scan, and I think those are fantastic to use, and they're getting better and better, out there. And I think there's a time, and it feels like we're maybe a few years out, where I think passwords are just going to go away, and will be replaced with different types of biometrics. We have another type of biometric capability within our business that uses one's voice as their password, and these things will continue to evolve, and it feels like passwords are on their way out. But that is just replacing the password that one would use to get into that device. So it doesn't mean that if I'm using a biometric that I can save all my passwords to my browser and be okay. You'd still want to make sure that you're being thoughtful with all of the other preventative measures, that I talked about there.
Thank you. Question: should I ever let online companies store my credit card information? So we're all being pushed into the internet to, in our quarantine world, we still need to shop, we still need to transact. When it comes to sites that are asking for credit card information, how do we handle that?
Yeah, it's another really, really great question, and one that I've had before, by the way. So here's how I think about it. I personally only shop at reputable places online, and if I don't know it, if it's not a popular destination, then I'm going to be really careful, and I'm probably not going to buy anything from them. And when as far as storing that information online, sometimes all it takes is using your credit card once at that destination, and they have it. So I think we need to be really, really careful there. Personally, though, I'm not as concerned about storing my credit card online with the companies that I've permission to use it and transactions that I effect with them. But here's one really important point. It's only my credit card. Never would any company, I don't care who they are, ever have access to my debit card. I think there's incredible protections that come along with using credit cards. And these days, it doesn't take much more than calling up that credit card company and let them know of a fraudulent transaction, or that you need to file a dispute. And these things are taken care of pretty quickly. And very often the credit card companies, they sometimes find them before we do, and they alert us to them. I know I've had that happen to me many times. So long as we're shopping at reputable places, personally, I'm comfortable with that. But again, it's only my credit card, never my debit card. And also, I'm paying close attention to my statements. I actually, this might sound a bit extreme, but every single time there is a charge on my credit card, I now get a push notification on my iPhone. It just throws up for a second, and I can see, okay, that charge was there. I just went through the toll booth, and here's the charge. And that has allowed me to stay on top of things, really, really easily. So some different best practices there as I think about credit cards online.
Thank you. As we get ready to close out at the bottom half of the hour here, a couple more questions. I had my Amazon account hacked. Other than checking my credit report, are there any other clues that show identity theft is in the works?
That's
a tough one, because
it's a difficult one
all the time.
I think it requires some real vigilance and So when I think of my Amazon account getting hijacked, and how might I have prevented that? I know Amazon has multi-factor authentication. Could that have kept someone out? But the identity theft matter is more difficult, because it means somebody's opening up accounts under your name, and how do you prevent such a thing? I think you control your information as best you can. I think you are really thoughtful about where you're entering user IDs, where you're entering passwords. But you just have to really stay on top of things these days, whether it's your statements, whether it's looking at an app like Credit Karma that can help you see your open accounts and is near real time. Other than shutting down your credit bureaus or locking or freezing your credit like we had talked about, I can't think of a way to stop that from happening. So sometimes it's about a really effective and very quick response and staying on top of things as well.
One of the challenges that we all have is we get accustomed to the technology or the device, piece of equipment that we use, and things change, whether it's new operating systems, upgrades. Sure. I actually have 3 iPhones in front of me because there's something on this one that I keep for sentimental reasons. So yeah. It's what advice do you have on how we can keep some old material, keep some old devices that may be meaningful, but yet at the same time make sure that we're following best practices for our own protection?
Yeah, it's important to stay up to date on technology because as new versions of software come out, they get better, faster, but most importantly, they're shoring up security gaps and known vulnerabilities. So that's both specific to hardware, and software. Now I know I'm much more comfortable on the Apple platform than I am Android, but I know these days I have my iPhone set up such that things are stored in the cloud. Apple has them in their data centers, and when I get a new phone, it's really not much more difficult for me other than entering in my user ID and password, and it just downloads everything. It's my email, pictures, you name it. It's all on there, and they make it really easy, and it's how they keep you on their platforms as well. But those are things that have worked really, really well for me.
That's excellent. Well, Adam, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I know so many of our clients and audience members have gotten value. We have a number of questions that we didn't get to, unfortunately, but we tried to cover a wide range of topics. So encourage you, if you have any specific questions, if you want to email them to us for follow-up, we're happy to take those and respond to your needs. Adam, you've provided and had these conversations with many clients throughout the country. Final thoughts, takeaways. You've been such a valuable resource to us. Thank you for your guidance as we've bolstered our cybersecurity practices. And just a quick comment to our audience, being your trusted advisor and given the nature of the industry, caring for your money, having substantial asset base that we manage, we are constantly under scrutiny by fraudsters. So we are working every day to be vigilant about what's going on, and it is not one and done. It's a constant effort, and I commend our IT team and compliance team and everyone that's within our organization and their commitment to care for our clients and doing things like voice-to-voice verification and making sure that there's security on transactions. So those are all things that we're doing internally. Just want to pass that on to our audience, but also I guess let you, if you wouldn't mind, having the final word on takeaways.
Sure. I know we've covered a lot, and Nathan, how about I work with your staff on maybe some follow-up that you guys could send out that somehow summarizes what we've covered. That might be helpful for your clients, and I'm happy to do that because I know we've covered a lot. As I think about the things I might want to bring one's attention back to, remember what I said about email. Everything we see from compromises to fraud, it all tends to come back to email. So that's one I want to continue to bring attention to. Be thoughtful with your email, be careful with your email, be suspect of things that are in your inbox, and just be careful. I want to come back to multi-factor authentication and the importance of it. Use it everywhere you can. It's the very best thing in the event one's user ID and password is compromised. It's what will keep the bad people out. So that's a big one. And then maybe the point I'd want to end on, which I had mentioned earlier, is that mention of instinct and just trusting your instinct. And if something doesn't feel right, pick up the phone, call your advisor, and have a conversation about it. And if it's okay, everyone wins. And if it's not, you trusting that instinct is what saved you from a very difficult situation. And it's probably that I think I'd want to call out as much as anything tonight.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for attending. Please be safe. Take a day at a time. We seem to have more time in our quarantine world to perhaps invest into best practices around protecting ourselves. But please know that we're available to support you every step of the way. And Adam, thank you once again for the generous use of your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.